In the depths of space, where stars are born and civilizations die, there exists a truth that even the most advanced species fear to whisper. Some hungers can never be satisfied, some thirsts can never be quenched, and some beings are condemned to eternal suffering for sins they cannot remember. The dragon Vorthak had been searching for 374 years, 11 months, and 16 days. Not for treasure, not for power, not for revenge, but for a single drop of water that could touch his soul. Across 17 galaxies, through the ruins of 1,000 civilizations, past the remains of gods, and the birthplaces of nightmares, he had sought the impossible. Until the day a small human child looked at him with eyes full of starlight and asked, "Why are you crying?" What happens when the most feared predator in the universe discovers that salvation might come in the smallest, most fragile package? What happens when a species barely capable of leaving their home planet holds the key to ending centuries of cosmic suffering? This is the story of how humanity's greatest weakness became their most terrifying strength, and how a dying dragon learned that sometimes the most powerful magic in the universe is simply caring about someone else's pain. The mining station orbiting Kepler 442b was supposed to be abandoned. According to the star charts Vorthak had stolen from a Zephyrian cruiser 3 months ago, the humans had evacuated this sector after their automated systems detected dangerous radiation levels from the nearby neutron star. The dragon should have found nothing but empty corridors, silent machinery, and the metallic taste of death that clung to all forsaken places. Instead, he found Lisa Martinez, age 7, sitting in the station's observation deck with her feet dangling over the edge of a chair too big for her, humming a tune he didn't recognize while watching the aurora patterns dance across the planet's atmosphere below. Vorthak had materialized through the station's hull, using the phase-walking abilities that made his kind so feared across the galaxy. His massive form, nearly 20 feet from snout to tail, filled the observation deck with shadows that seemed to devour light itself. Scales that had once gleamed like polished obsidian now appeared dull and cracked, each one etched with the microscopic scars of 3 centuries spent traveling through the hostile vacuum of space. His eyes, once burning amber, had faded to the color of dying embers. The child turned around in her chair when she heard the low rumble of his breathing. She should have screamed. Every other sentient being in the galaxy would have screamed, would have fled, would have begged for mercy that Vorthak was no longer capable of giving. Instead, Lisa tilted her head to one side, studying his face with the unguarded curiosity that only children possessed. "You look sad," she said in Standard Galactic, though her accent carried the distinctive inflection of Earth's Western Hemisphere. "Are you okay?" Vorthak froze. In 374 years of wandering, no one had ever asked him that question. Zephyrians had challenged him to ritual combat. Andromedans had offered him tribute to spare their worlds. The synthetic minds of the collective had attempted to negotiate logical arrangements for their mutual survival. Pirates had shot at him, governments had tried to study him, and merchants had attempted to sell him everything from antimatter weaponry to exotic matter crystals. But no one had ever asked if he was okay. "Child." His voice rumbled like distant thunder, the words emerging from vocal cords designed for hunting calls across light years of empty space. "You should not be here. This place was evacuated for your safety." Lisa swung her legs back and forth, apparently unbothered by the fact that she was conversing with a creature that could level city-sized space stations with his breath alone. "I know, but my mom is an engineer, and she had to stay behind to make sure the reactor cores shut down properly. She said it would only take a few more hours, and I got bored waiting in the shuttle." She pointed toward the corridor behind Vorthak, where he could now sense the faint electromagnetic signature of human technology still operating in the station's lower levels. The dragon's enhanced hearing picked up the sound of plasma cutters and the rhythmic hum of power distribution systems being systematically dismantled. "Besides," Lisa continued, "I wanted to see the pretty lights one more time before we left. Mom says we're going to live on Mars now, but Mars doesn't have lights like these." Vorthak followed her gaze to the planet below, where charged particles from the neutron star interacted with atmospheric gases to create cascading curtains of green and gold. The display was indeed beautiful, though the radiation that caused it would prove lethal to most organic life within a matter of hours. Humans, with their fragile biology and brief lifespans, were particularly vulnerable to such exposure. "The radiation will harm you," Vorthak said, though he found himself sitting down on the deck, plating rather than looming over the child. His massive form settled with surprising grace, tail coiling around his body in a posture that would have been recognized as non-threatening by any being familiar with draconic body language. "I know," Lisa said matter-of-factly, "but Mom gave me these." She held up her arm, showing Vorthak a bracelet made of small metallic devices that pulsed with soft blue light. "Radiation absorbers. They'll keep me safe for a while. Long enough to see the lights, anyway." The dragon stared at the primitive devices with something approaching amazement. Human technology was notoriously crude compared to the elegant solutions employed by elder species like his own, but it possessed a stubborn practicality that often proved effective despite its limitations. These simple absorbers would indeed protect the child for several hours, though they would be useless against the kind of cosmic forces that had been slowly killing Vorthak for centuries. "You are not afraid of me," he observed. Lisa shrugged, a gesture that seemed to encompass her entire worldview. "My mom always tells me not to judge people by how they look. She says the scariest-looking people are sometimes the nicest, and the pretty ones can be really mean. You don't look mean, just tired. Tired." The word hit Vorthak with unexpected force. He had been called many things over the course of his extended life: destroyer, tyrant, monster, legend. But tired? That was perhaps the most accurate description anyone had ever given him. "I am searching for something," he found himself saying, though he couldn't explain why he felt compelled to share this with a human child he had just met. "I've been searching for a very long time." "What are you looking for?" Lisa asked, turning in her chair to face him more directly. In the light from the aurora below, her brown eyes seemed to hold flecks of gold that reminded him painfully of better times. Vorthak hesitated. How could he explain the curse that had driven him across the galaxy? How could he describe the burning thirst that no liquid could quench, the spiritual drought that had reduced him from a proud apex predator to a wandering wretch? The concepts involved would be difficult enough for another dragon to understand, let alone a child from a species that had only recently developed interstellar travel. "Water," he said finally, choosing the simplest possible explanation. "I'm looking for water." Lisa's face lit up with the kind of enthusiastic helpfulness that was apparently endemic to her species. "Oh, I have water. Hold on." She fumbled with a small pack beside her chair and produced a standard-issue hydration bulb, the kind used by human space travelers. "It's not very cold anymore, but it's still good." Before Vorthak could protest, she had squeezed the bulb and sent a stream of ordinary water arcing through the observation deck's artificial atmosphere. Droplets scattered across his snout and the forward edge of his left wing, each one sparkling in the aurora light like tiny stars. The dragon felt the liquid splash against his scales and soak into the microscopic cracks that 3 centuries of cosmic radiation had carved into his hide. It was ordinary water, processed through human filtration systems and treated with the standard mixture of minerals and nutrients necessary for baseline human physiology. By any rational measure, it should have been completely useless to him. But for one impossible moment, as those drops rolled down the worn scales of his face, Vorthak felt something he had almost forgotten: relief. Not the complete cessation of his thirst that he had been seeking for centuries, but a tiny oasis of coolness in the endless desert of his existence. It lasted perhaps 3 seconds before the familiar burning returned, but those 3 seconds contained more hope than he had experienced in decades. Lisa was watching his reaction carefully, her young face creased with concern. "Did that help at all? You look a little less tired now." Vorthak stared at her in wonder. The water itself hadn't been special. The minerals, temperature, and molecular composition were identical to billions of gallons he had encountered throughout the galaxy. But Something about the way it had been offered, the simple human desire to help without expectation of reward, had made it different. Yes, he whispered, his voice barely audible above the station's environmental systems. It helped. Good. Lisa beamed at him with the kind of unreserved joy that seemed to radiate from her like heat from a small sun. I knew it would. My mom always says that sharing makes everything better. She settled back in her chair, apparently considering the matter resolved, and returned her attention to the light show below. Vorthak remained motionless, processing what had just occurred. In 3 centuries of searching, he had consumed water from the sacred springs of Andromeda Prime, from the quantum fountains of the collective's primary nodes, from the living oceans of gas giant moons where ancient leviathans swam through liquid methane. None of it had provided even a moment's respite from his suffering. But a few drops offered freely by a human child had actually worked, if only briefly. "Child," he said carefully, "what is your name?" "Lisa," she replied without taking her eyes off the aurora. "Lisa Martinez. What's yours?" "I am Vorthak." The name felt strange in his mouth. He had not spoken it aloud to another being in over 40 years. "That's a pretty name," Lisa said with the casual acceptance that children displayed toward things adults found impossible to understand. "Are you from around here?" The question struck Vorthak as absurd. He was one of perhaps a dozen members of his species still alive in the known galaxy, the offspring of creatures that had ruled star systems when Lisa's ancestors were still discovering fire. His homeworld had been consumed by its own sun before the first human had looked up at the night sky and wondered what lay beyond Earth's atmosphere. "No," he said simply. "I am from very far away." "Me too," sort of Lisa said. "I was born on Titan, but my mom says we're originally from a place called Mexico on Earth. I've never been there, though. Maybe someday we'll visit together." The casual optimism in her voice was remarkable. Here was a child who had been uprooted from the only home she had ever known, was currently sitting in a radiation-flooded space station waiting for her mother to finish dangerous work, and was facing an uncertain future on a planet she had never seen. Yet she spoke of visiting distant worlds with the same cheerful confidence that members of elder species reserve for planning their next meal. "Your mother works to protect others," Vorthak observed, thinking of the engineer below who was ensuring that the station's shutdown wouldn't create hazards for future travelers through the system. "Uh-huh. She says engineering is about making sure things work the way they're supposed to, so people don't get hurt." Lisa glanced back at him with obvious pride. "She's really smart. She can fix almost anything. And you're not afraid to be alone while she works." "I'm not alone," Lisa said, as if this were obvious. "You're here." The simple statement hit Vorthak like a physical blow. This child, who had known him for less than an hour, had already accepted his presence with the kind of trust that most beings wouldn't grant him after years of proving his intentions. She had shared her water, her company, and now her unguarded confidence in his character. It occurred to him that he had never experienced anything quite like this. Dragons were solitary creatures by nature, prone to extended periods of isolation that would drive most social species insane. Even before his curse had begun, Vorthak had measured his friendships in decades and his alliances in centuries. The concept of forming a meaningful connection with someone within the span of a single conversation was completely foreign to his understanding of how relationships functioned. Yet here he was, sitting on the deck of an abandoned human mining station, feeling more at peace than he had in 300 years, all because a 7-year-old had decided he looked like he needed company. "Lisa," he said carefully, "what your mother is doing, is it dangerous?" The child's expression grew more serious, showing a maturity that seemed incongruous with her small frame and cheerful demeanor. "A little bit. The reactor cores are really big, and if they don't shut down in the right order, they might explode. But Mom knows what she's doing. She shut down lots of reactors before." Vorthak extended his enhanced senses toward the lower levels of the station, cataloging the electromagnetic signatures and energy patterns that painted a detailed picture of the work being performed below. His ancient mind, trained in the mathematics of stellar engineering and the physics of space-time manipulation, quickly processed the data and reached a troubling conclusion. The human engineer was attempting to shut down a cascade of fusion reactors while working alone, using equipment that appeared to be malfunctioning in several critical areas. The probability of successful completion was approximately 37%. The probability of a catastrophic failure that would vaporize everything within a 1,000-kilometer radius was correspondingly high. "Your mother," he said slowly, "might require assistance." Lisa's face brightened again. "Could you help her? You look really strong, and Mom always says that big problems are easier to solve when you have help." The dragon considered this. He could indeed help. His understanding of exotic energy systems was vastly superior to anything humans had developed, and his physical capabilities would allow him to perform tasks that would be impossible for organic beings working in high-radiation environments. The work would be trivial for someone of his abilities. But there was a problem. Vorthak's reputation preceded him wherever he traveled. Most species had standing orders to flee or fight when confronted with a dragon, and humans were no exception. If he appeared in the engineering sections of the station, Lisa's mother would likely assume she was under attack and respond accordingly. The resulting confrontation could easily prove more dangerous than the reactor failure they were trying to prevent. "I'm not certain your mother would welcome my assistance," he said carefully. "Why not?" Lisa asked with genuine puzzlement. How could he explain that his species was synonymous with destruction throughout most of known space? That dragonkind had spent millennia establishing themselves as apex predators whose very presence meant death for lesser beings? That the sight of his true form had driven entire civilizations to madness and despair? "Many people find my appearance disturbing," he said finally. Lisa looked at him with the serious consideration she might give to a particularly interesting puzzle. "You're pretty big," she admitted, "and your teeth are really sharp. But you haven't tried to hurt me at all, and you were nice when I gave you water. I think Mom would like you if she got to know you." The child's faith in her mother's ability to see past his monstrous exterior was touching, but Vorthak knew better. 3 centuries of experience had taught him that beings rarely looked beyond the surface when confronted with something that triggered their deepest survival instincts. Still, the situation below was growing more dangerous by the minute. His enhanced hearing could detect stress patterns in the engineer's breathing, and the electromagnetic fluctuations from the reactor cores were becoming increasingly unstable. If something went wrong, Lisa would die along with her mother. The thought of this bright, generous child being snuffed out because of preventable mechanical failures was suddenly intolerable. "Perhaps," he said slowly, "there's a way I could help without causing alarm." He closed his eyes and began the complex mental exercises that would allow him to project his consciousness into the station's computer systems. Phase walking through matter was a relatively simple application of his abilities. Interfacing with electronic networks required far more delicate manipulation of quantum fields, but it could be done. Vorthak's awareness suddenly expanded to encompass the entire mining station. Through thousands of sensors and monitoring devices, he could perceive every aspect of the reactor shutdown procedure. In the engineering bay 17 levels below, he found Carmen Martinez working frantically at a control console, while emergency lights bathed everything in harsh red illumination. The woman was competent, he realized immediately. Her movements were precise and efficient, her understanding of the systems both thorough and intuitive. Under normal circumstances, she would have completed the shutdown procedure without difficulty. But these are not normal circumstances. A microfracture in one of the primary control circuits had caused a cascade of minor failures that were slowly overwhelming her ability to compensate manually. Through the station's internal communication system, Vorthak began feeding her information. He made the data appear to come from the station's automated diagnostic systems, presenting solutions to problems moments before she encountered them. When a backup regulator failed, she found detailed instructions for bypassing it waiting on her secondary console. When a safety interlock refused to disengage, the appropriate override codes appeared on her display as if they had been stored in the station's emergency protocols all along. Working together, though she would never know it, they began to bring the cascade of failures under control. Above in the observation deck, Lisa had noticed that Vorthak seemed to be concentrating intensely on something she couldn't see. "Are you okay?" she asked. "I am helping your mother," he replied without opening his eyes. "She is very skilled. The work is proceeding well." "Good," Lisa said with satisfaction. "I told you she was smart." As the minutes passed, Vorthak found himself genuinely impressed by Carmen Martinez's capabilities. She adapted to each new challenge with a flexibility that was characteristic of her species, improvising solutions with whatever tools were available. When the primary coolant system developed a leak, she rerouted the flow through auxiliary channels that weren't designed for that purpose, but would serve adequately for the time needed to complete the shutdown. When a critical sensor array went offline, she calculated the necessary adjustments using manual observations and backup instruments. Humans, Vorthak realized, possessed a remarkable ability to function effectively under adverse conditions. Their technology might be primitive compared to what elder species had developed, but their approach to problem-solving was extraordinarily adaptable. Whereas Zephyrian engineer would have followed rigid protocols, and an Andromedan would have relied on perfect computational modeling, Carmen Martinez was essentially improvising her way through a situation that would have challenged much more advanced civilizations. More importantly, she was doing it all to protect other travelers who might pass through this system in the future. The reactor shutdown wasn't necessary for her own survival. She and Lisa could simply leave in their shuttle and be safely away before any potential explosion occurred. But an uncontrolled reactor failure would leave the system contaminated with exotic particles that could damage ships for decades to come. Carmen was risking her life to prevent harm to people she would never meet. This kind of casual self-sacrifice for the benefit of strangers was not uncommon among humans. Vorthak had learned during his travels. They seemed to possess an instinctive drive to help others, even when doing so provided no tangible benefit to themselves. It was a trait that more pragmatic species found both admirable and incomprehensible. "The last reactor core is stabilizing," he announced, opening his eyes and withdrawing his consciousness from the station systems. "Your mother will be finished soon." Lisa clapped her hands together with delight. "I knew she could do it. She's the best engineer in the whole galaxy." "She is indeed very capable," Vorthak agreed, and found that he meant it sincerely. They sat in comfortable silence for several minutes, watching the aurora patterns shift and dance across the planet's upper atmosphere. The radiation levels were increasing as the neutron star's rotation brought its most active pole toward their position. But Lisa's protective devices would keep her safe for another hour at least. "Vorthak," she said eventually. "Yes. Are you going to stay here, or are you still looking for water?" The question brought him back to the reality of his situation. The brief relief he had experienced from Lisa's gift of ordinary water had already faded, leaving him with the same burning thirst that had driven him across the galaxy. But something had changed. For the first time in centuries, he felt like he might be on the right path. "I must continue searching," he said. "But I have learned something important today." "What's that?" Vorthak considered how to explain the revelation that was still taking shape in his mind. "I've been looking for the wrong kind of water," he said slowly. "I thought I needed something rare and powerful. But perhaps what I truly need is something given freely with kindness." Lisa nodded as if this made perfect sense to her. "Mom always says the best gifts aren't expensive ones. They're the ones that show you care about somebody. Your mother is very wise." "Yes, she is." Lisa glanced toward the corridor that led to the lower levels. "I think I hear her coming back. She'll want to meet you." Vorthak could indeed hear the approaching footsteps of an adult human, along with the electronic chirping of handheld diagnostic equipment being shut down. In a few moments, Carmen Martinez would arrive in the observation deck to collect her daughter and discover a legendary predator engaged in casual conversation with a 7-year-old. The dragon found himself genuinely curious about how this encounter would unfold. 3 centuries of experience suggested that it would end badly, with fear and misunderstanding leading to conflict. But Lisa's absolute confidence in her mother's character had planted a seed of hope that perhaps, just perhaps, this time might be different. Lisa. Carmen's voice echoed from the corridor, carrying the particular combination of relief and exhaustion that came from completing dangerous work successfully. Where are you, Mija? We need to get back to the shuttle before the radiation level spike. I'm in here, Mom, Lisa called back. And I made a new friend. Footsteps quickened in the corridor. A moment later, Carmen Martinez stepped into the observation deck, her coveralls stained with coolant fluid and her dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. She was a compact woman in her early 30s with calloused hands and intelligent brown eyes that immediately took in the entire scene. Her daughter sitting calmly in an oversized chair, the spectacular Aurora display visible through the deck's transparent aluminum windows, and 20 feet of ancient dragon coiled peacefully on the deck plating. To her credit, Carmen Martinez did not scream, did not flee, and did not immediately reach for any weapons. Instead, she stood very still for approximately 10 seconds while her mind processed information that contradicted everything her species' survival instincts were telling her. "Hello," she said finally, her voice carefully controlled. "You must be Lisa's new friend." "I am Vorthak," the dragon replied, inclining his massive head in what he hoped would be recognized as a gesture of respect. "Your daughter has been excellent company." Carmen's gaze flicked between her child and the creature that could have devoured them both without effort. Lisa was obviously unharmed and appeared to be completely comfortable, which suggested that whatever this dragon's intentions might be, they weren't immediately hostile. "I see," Carmen said slowly. "Lisa, sweetheart, why don't you come over here and help me pack up our things?" "Okay, Mom." Lisa hopped down from her chair with the easy grace of a child accustomed to low-gravity environments. As she walked past Vorthak toward her mother, she reached out and patted one of his front claws. "It was nice meeting you, Vorthak. I hope you find what you're looking for." The casual contact sent another brief wave of relief through the dragon's system, confirming his growing suspicion that the solution to his curse had less to do with the water itself and more to do with the spirit in which it was offered. "Thank you, Lisa," he said sincerely. "You have helped me more than you know." As mother and daughter gathered their belongings, Carmen kept one eye on Vorthak while engaging in quiet conversation with Lisa. The dragon's enhanced hearing allowed him to follow their exchange clearly. "Mija, you know you're not supposed to talk to strangers without permission." "I know, Mom. But he looked really sad, and you always say we should help people who are sad." "That's true, but this is a very special situation." "He's nice, Mom. He helped you fix the reactors." Carmen paused in her packing and looked directly at Vorthak with new understanding. "You're monitoring the engineering systems." "Your daughter was concerned for your safety," Vorthak replied. "I merely ensure that you had access to all relevant diagnostic information." "The bypass codes for the safety interlocks," Carmen said, putting pieces together. "The backup diagnostic routines. That was you. Your skills required no enhancement. I simply provided data that was already available within the station's computers." Carmen studied him for a long moment, clearly weighing her words carefully. "Thank you," she said finally. "The situation was more complicated than I initially realized. Your assistance may have prevented a very dangerous outcome." "Your daughter asked me to help," Vorthak said simply. "I could not refuse such a request." Lisa had finished collecting her things and now stood beside her mother, looking back and forth between the two adults with obvious satisfaction. "See, Mom? I told you you'd like him." Carmen put her arm around her daughter's shoulders, a gesture that seemed to encompass protection, affection, and gentle exasperation in equal measure. "Yes, Mija, you were right." She turned back to Vorthak, and the dragon could see her struggling with something. Her engineer's mind was clearly telling her that she should gather more information about this unprecedented encounter, but her parental instincts were urging her to get her child away from potential danger as quickly as possible. "We have to leave soon," she said eventually. "The radiation levels are approaching the limits of our protective equipment." "Of course," Vorthak replied. You should not delay your departure on my account. But as the small family prepared to leave, Lisa suddenly turned back to him with an expression of genuine concern. Vorthack, are you going to be okay here by yourself? The question caught him off guard. In 3 centuries of wandering, no one had ever worried about his well-being. The idea that a human child would be concerned about leaving him alone was both touching and utterly foreign to his experience. I will be fine, he assured her. I'm accustomed to solitude. Lisa frowned, clearly unsatisfied with this answer. But what if you get thirsty again? I don't have any more water to give you. Carmen was watching this exchange with growing amazement. Her daughter was expressing genuine concern for a creature that represented every nightmare her species had ever conceived about the dangers lurking in deep space, and somehow the concern seemed completely natural and appropriate. Perhaps, Carmen said carefully, if you're planning to continue your search in this sector, you might consider visiting New Guadalajara. It's our next destination. The colony has excellent water purification facilities, and she paused, seeming to surprise herself with what she was about to say. And they always welcome travelers who are seeking help. Vorthack stared at her in astonishment. This human engineer, who had every reason to fear him, was actually extending an invitation for him to visit her new home. The gesture was so unexpected, so contrary to everything he had experienced in his interactions with other species, that he found himself momentarily speechless. That is very generous, he managed finally. But I would not wish to cause alarm among your fellow colonists. New Guadalajara is a frontier settlement, Carmen said with a slight smile. We're used to dealing with the unexpected, and anyone who helps protect civilian installations from reactor failures is always welcome, regardless of their species. Lisa beamed at both adults, apparently delighted that they were getting along so well. You should definitely come visit Vorthack. I bet the colony has really good water, and I can show you around and introduce you to everybody. The casual confidence with which she spoke of introducing a legendary dragon to her neighbors was remarkable. Lisa apparently saw no reason why her friends and classmates wouldn't be as accepting of Vorthack as she had been. I will consider your invitation, Vorthack said, and realized that he actually meant it. For the first time in centuries, he had a destination that offered something more appealing than simply continuing his aimless wandering. As the family made their final preparations to leave, Carmen approached him one more time. She moved carefully, obviously still somewhat intimidated by his size and reputation, but her expression was determined. I don't know what you're really searching for, she said quietly, but I have a feeling it might not be what you think it is. Sometimes the things we need most are hiding in places we never think to look. Your daughter has already taught me that, Vorthack replied. I'm beginning to suspect that my search has been misdirected for some time. Carmen nodded, seeming to understand more than he had actually said. Well, if you do decide to visit New Guadalajara, ask for Carmen Martinez at the Colonial Engineering Office. I'll make sure you get a proper welcome. Mother and daughter left the observation deck together, their footsteps echoing through the corridors as they made their way back to their shuttle. Vorthack remained motionless until he heard the distant sound of engines igniting and felt the electromagnetic pulse that indicated their departure. Then, he was alone again, as he had been for most of the past 3 centuries. But something fundamental had changed. The burning thirst that had driven him across the galaxy was still present, but it no longer felt hopeless. For the first time in longer than he could remember, he had a reason to believe that relief might be possible. More importantly, he had encountered something he had never expected to find in his travels: genuine kindness offered without expectation of reward. Lisa's gift of water had been meaningful not because of any special properties the liquid possessed, but because it had been given freely by someone who simply wanted to help. As he prepared to leave the abandoned mining station, Vorthack found himself thinking about New Guadalajara and the colony of humans who might be willing to welcome a dragon seeking redemption. The journey would take him several weeks through hyperspace, but for the first time in centuries, he was traveling towards something rather than simply away from his past. Perhaps Karma Martinez had been right. Perhaps the thing he needed most had been hiding in a place he had never thought to look, in the simple human capacity for compassion toward those who suffered, regardless of how frightening they might appear. New Guadalajara existed in defiance of everything the galaxy considered reasonable. Built on a moon that orbited a gas giant in a system that most species had written off as uninhabitable, the human colony thrived through a combination of stubborn determination, creative engineering, and the kind of cheerful disregard for conventional wisdom that seemed to be a defining characteristic of their species. Vorthak observed the settlement from the edge of the system for 3 days before approaching, using his enhanced senses to study the colony's defenses, population patterns, and technological capabilities. What he found surprised him. The settlement was protected not by weapons designed to repel invaders, but by an intricate network of early warning systems, environmental shields, and automated distress beacons. It was a defensive strategy built around survival and communication rather than destruction. More intriguingly, the colony's databases contained detailed protocols for dealing with non-standard diplomatic contacts, including specific procedures for welcoming refugee populations, political exiles, and what the humans euphemistically termed beings with complex histories. New Guadalajara, it appeared, had been designed from the beginning as a sanctuary for those who had nowhere else to go. When Vorthak finally approached the colony's outer traffic control zone, he was met not by military interceptors, but by a single, elderly human in a converted cargo hauler who introduced himself as Captain Rodriguez, the harbor master. "Welcome to New Guadalajara space," Rodriguez said over the communication channel, his voice carrying the weathered authority of someone who had spent decades dealing with the unexpected. "State your name, species, and the nature of your visit." "I am Vorthak," the dragon replied, allowing his true form to become visible as he dropped out of phase shift near the harbor master's vessel. "I am of the species you call dragons. Carmen Martinez invited me to visit your colony." There was a moment of silence on the communication channel. Through his enhanced senses, Vorthak could detect elevated stress patterns in Rodriguez's biological rhythms, but the man's voice remained steady when he responded. "Copy that, Vorthak. Carmen did mention you might be coming our way. She's waiting at Landing Bay 7 to meet you. I'll transmit approach vectors and safety protocols for your arrival." The casual professionalism of the response was remarkable. Vorthak had expected fear, confusion, demands for explanations about his intentions. Instead, he received navigation data and a polite reminder to keep his approach speed below 50,000 kilometers per hour within the colony's immediate vicinity. As he descended toward the moon's surface, Vorthak studied New Guadalajara's layout with growing fascination. The settlement had been built inside a natural crater that provided protection from cosmic radiation and meteor impacts. Transparent aluminum domes covered residential and commercial areas, while industrial facilities were constructed deeper underground. Gardens and recreational areas occupied terrace levels that followed the crater's natural contours, creating a spiral pattern that was both beautiful and efficient. The architecture displayed the same practical adaptability he had observed in Carmen's engineering work. Buildings were modular and connected by pressurized walkways that could be quickly sealed in case of atmospheric breach. Solar collectors and fusion generators provided redundant power systems, while atmospheric processors worked continuously to maintain breathable air within the domes. It was a settlement designed by people who understood that survival on the frontier required flexibility and careful planning. Landing Bay 7 was located on the crater's rim, where ships could dock without entering the colony's atmospheric envelope. As Vorthak settled his massive form onto the designated landing platform, he saw Carmen Martinez waiting for him alongside a small delegation of other humans. She was dressed in what appeared to be formal civilian clothing rather than her engineer's coveralls, and she carried herself with the confident posture of someone who had prepared thoroughly for this encounter. Beside her stood a tall man with silver hair and the bearing of a career administrator, a woman in medical whites who carried a portable scanner unit, and Lisa, who was bouncing on her toes with barely contained excitement. Vorthak, Lisa called out as soon as he had solidified fully into normal space-time. You came. I told everyone you would. The dragon found himself smiling, an expression that would have terrified most beings, but which seemed to delight the 7-year-old. I said I would consider your invitation, Lisa. After much thought, I decided that New Guadalajara sounded like a place worth visiting. Carmen stepped forward, extending her hand in the human gesture of greeting. Welcome to our home, Vorthak. I hope your journey was uneventful. It was illuminating, Vorthak replied, carefully extending one claw to touch her hand briefly. I had time to reflect on our previous conversation. The tall man with silver hair cleared his throat and stepped forward. I'm Governor Chun, he said with the measured tone of a politician who was working hard to appear calm. Carmen has told us a great deal about your assistance at the mining station. The colony is grateful for your service to civilian safety. Vorthak studied the governor's face, reading the complex mixture of apprehension and genuine appreciation in his expression. Chin was clearly uncomfortable with the situation, but he was making a sincere effort to extend hospitality despite his fears. It was another example of human behavior that seemed to defy logical explanation. I did nothing more than provide technical assistance to a skilled engineer, Vorthak said diplomatically. Carmen's expertise was responsible for preventing any genuine danger. Nevertheless, Chen continued, anyone who helps protect civilian installations is welcome in New Guadalajara. Dr. Patel here is our chief medical officer. She's familiar with exotic biology and wanted to ensure you had access to any medical support you might require during your visit. The woman in medical whites stepped forward with the confident manner of someone accustomed to treating unusual patients. I understand you've been experiencing some chronic health issues, she said without preamble. Carmen mentioned that you're seeking treatment for a condition involving fluid intake. Vorthak was startled by the directness of the question. He had expected to maintain the fiction that he was simply a traveler seeking ordinary water, but Dr. Patel apparently saw through such polite euphemisms immediately. You could say that, he replied carefully. I've been thirsty for a very long time. Dr. Patel nodded, as if this explanation made perfect sense. Chronic dehydration presents differently in various species, and I imagine the physiological requirements of dragons are quite complex. Would you be willing to undergo some basic diagnostic scans? Nothing invasive, just external readings to help us understand your metabolic needs. The offer was so unexpected that Vorthak found himself momentarily speechless. In 3 centuries of wandering, no medical professional had ever volunteered to study his condition. Most beings assumed that dragons were essentially indestructible and required no health care whatsoever. You would be willing to examine me? He asked. That's what we do here, Dr. Patel said with a slight smile. New Guadalajara was founded as a medical sanctuary as well as a colonial settlement. We specialize in treating refugees and travelers who have complex medical histories that traditional facilities can't or won't handle. Lisa had been listening to this conversation with obvious interest. Now she tugged on her mother's sleeve and whispered something that Vorthak's enhanced hearing easily picked up. Mom, can Vorthak stay in our guest room? I want to show him my rock collection and my model starships. Carmen glanced at the massive dragon and then back at her daughter. Sweetheart, I don't think Vorthak would fit very well in our apartment, but I'm sure we can arrange accommodations that will be more suitable for someone his size. Actually, Governor Chin interjected, we've prepared one of the cargo bays in the industrial section. It has environmental controls and communication access, and it's large enough to accommodate, well, large visitors. The speed with which the colony had prepared for his arrival was remarkable. Vorthak had sent only a brief message announcing his intention to visit, yet these humans had somehow organized medical support, secured appropriate accommodations, and apparently briefed their leadership on proper diplomatic protocols for dealing with dragons. You are most generous, he said sincerely. I had not expected such thorough preparations. Word travels fast in a small community, Carmen explained. When people heard that Lisa had made friends with a dragon who was seeking help, everyone wanted to contribute something. The engineering team prepared power supplies for your quarters. The agricultural division set aside space in the water purification facility for any tests Dr. Patel might need to run. And the children's school has been buzzing with excitement about meeting their first extraterrestrial visitor. The children want to meet me? Vorthak asked, genuinely surprised. Lisa nodded enthusiastically. Oh yes, everyone at school wants to hear about your travels and see your spaceship and maybe learn some dragon words. Mrs. Patterson says meeting beings from other cultures is an important part of our education. The idea of a classroom full of human children eager to interact with him was both fascinating and terrifying. Vorthak had spent so long thinking of himself as a creature to be feared that the possibility of being welcomed as an educational opportunity had never occurred to him. Perhaps we should start with smaller introductions, Governor Chun suggested diplomatically. Let our guest settle in and undergo his medical evaluation before we schedule any public appearances. Dr. Patel was already setting up her portable scanning equipment, apparently eager to begin her examination. If you're ready, Vorthak, I'd like to start with some basic metabolic readings. This shouldn't cause any discomfort, and it will help me understand your current physiological state. Vorthak submitted to the scans with growing curiosity. The human medical technology was primitive compared to the diagnostic systems used by elder species, but Dr. Patel's technique was surprisingly sophisticated. She approached his physiology not as a collection of alien symptoms to be categorized, but as a complex biological system that could be understood through careful observation and analysis. Interesting, she murmured as data flowed across her scanner displays. Your cellular hydration levels are actually quite normal, but there are some unusual electromagnetic patterns in your nervous system, almost as if your body is seeking a specific type of molecular resonance rather than simple chemical hydration. You can detect that? Vorthak asked, impressed despite himself. The human body generates electromagnetic fields through neural activity, Dr. Patel explained. I've adapted our medical scanners to read similar patterns in other species. Your brain chemistry suggests that your thirst might be psychological or spiritual in nature rather than purely physical. Carmen and Governor Chun exchanged glances, clearly following the medical discussion with interest. Lisa, meanwhile, had wandered over to examine Vorthak's claws with a fearless curiosity that seemed to characterize her approach to everything unfamiliar. So, the water I gave him at the space station actually helped because I wanted to help him, Lisa said matter-of-factly. Not because the water was special. Dr. Patel stared at the 7-year-old with obvious amazement. That's actually a very sophisticated analysis of the situation. Yes, I think that might be exactly right. Vorthak looked down at Lisa, who was now tracing patterns on one of his claws with her finger. You understand what the doctor is saying? Sure, Lisa said with a shrug. Mom always tells me that the best medicine is caring about people. That's why Dr. Patel is so good at her job. She really wants to help everyone feel better. The casual wisdom of the statement struck Vorthak with unexpected force. This child had somehow intuited in moments what it had taken him centuries to begin to understand. His curse was not about finding the right kind of water, but about finding beings who genuinely cared about his suffering. Dr. Patel, he said slowly, if your analysis is correct, then my condition might be treatable here. I think it's very likely, she replied, beginning to pack up her equipment. But the treatment won't involve any medication or surgical procedures. What you need is a community of beings who can offer you genuine friendship and support. From what I can see, you've already started to receive exactly that kind of care. Governor Chun stepped forward again, apparently having reached some kind of decision during the medical consultation. Vorthak, I'd like to make you a formal offer. New Guadalajara is always in need of skilled technical advisors, especially those with expertise in exotic energy systems and interstellar engineering. If you're interested, we'd be honored to have you join our community on a permanent basis. The invitation was so far beyond anything Vorthak had expected that he found himself unable to respond immediately. A permanent home? A community that would welcome his contributions rather than fearing his presence? The possibility seemed too wonderful to be real. You would truly welcome me as a resident? He asked. We judge people by their actions here, Carmen said firmly. Your actions at the mining station showed us everything we needed to know about your character. Anyone who risks themselves to protect civilians is exactly the kind of person we want in our community. Lisa, who had been listening to this exchange with obvious delight, suddenly clapped her hands together. Does this mean you'll live here? Really and truly. I would need to consider such an offer carefully, Vorthak said, still struggling to process what was being proposed. It has been many centuries since I had a permanent residence anywhere. Well, you don't have to decide right now, Lisa said with the practical wisdom that seemed to come naturally to her. You can stay in the guest quarters and see if you like it here. If you do, then you can move in properly and help Mom with all her engineering projects. Dr. Patel had finished packing her medical equipment and now turned back to address Vorthak directly. I'd like to conduct a more thorough analysis of your condition over the next few days. If my preliminary diagnosis is correct, we might be able to design a treatment protocol that will provide significant relief from your symptoms. Treatment. Vorthak repeated, hardly daring to hope. Not in the traditional sense, Dr. Patel clarified, but if your thirst is indeed responding to genuine emotional support, then regular interaction with caring individuals should provide ongoing therapeutic benefits. New Guadalajara has an excellent support network for residents dealing with trauma and chronic health issues. The idea that his centuries of suffering might actually be treatable through simple human kindness was almost too overwhelming to contemplate. Vorthak had grown so accustomed to his pain that the possibility of relief seemed somehow unreal. I would be grateful for any treatment you could provide, he said quietly. Excellent, Governor Chun said, clearly pleased with how the initial meeting had proceeded. Carmen, would you mind showing Vorthak to his quarters? I'll have the housing office prepare the paperwork for a long-term residency application, just in case he decides to stay. As the small group began moving toward the colony's interior, Lisa walked alongside Vorthak's massive form, chattering cheerfully about all the things she wanted to show him. Her enthusiasm was infectious, and Vorthak found himself genuinely looking forward to seeing her rock collection and model starships. More importantly, he was beginning to understand that his long search might finally be nearing its end. Not because he had found some mystical source of healing water, but because he had discovered a community of beings who were willing to care about his well-being without expecting anything in return. The guest quarters that had been prepared for him were located in a converted storage bay deep within the colony's industrial section. The space was enormous by human standards, though reasonably comfortable for a creature of Vorthak's size. Environmental controls maintained perfect atmospheric composition and temperature, while communication terminals provided access to the colony's databases and external networks. But what impressed Vorthak most was the thoughtful attention to details that no one had been required to provide. Someone had installed additional lighting systems that produced wavelengths optimized for draconic vision. The flooring had been reinforced to support his weight without generating stress fractures that might concern him. Fresh water was available from multiple sources, including a small fountain that had obviously been added specifically for his comfort. The engineering team worked through the night to get everything ready, Carmen explained as she showed him around the quarters. Everyone wanted to make sure you felt welcome. Lisa had immediately claimed a corner of the vast space where she arranged her collection of mineral samples and small starship models in precise formations. This is my favorite piece, she announced, holding up a chunk of crystallized titanium that caught the light in spectacular fashion. I found it in the asteroid processing facility. Dr. Hendricks says it's almost perfectly pure. Vorthak examined the crystal with genuine interest. His knowledge of metallurgy and mineral formation was extensive, and he could see that Lisa had indeed found a remarkable specimen. This is very beautiful, he said sincerely. How did you know it was special? It was singing, Lisa replied, as if this explained everything. Singing? Vorthak asked, puzzled. Carmen smiled at her daughter's explanation. Lisa has an unusual sensitivity to electromagnetic frequencies. She can hear the resonance patterns that different materials produce. It's actually been quite useful for identifying rare minerals in our processing operations. This revelation added another layer to Vorthak's understanding of the remarkable child who had first offered him water. Lisa was not just naturally empathetic. She possessed sensory abilities that were rare even among species with enhanced perception. Her intuitive understanding of his condition might have been based on an actual ability to perceive the electromagnetic disturbances that Dr. Patel had detected in his nervous system. "Can you hear anything from me?" he asked Lisa curiously. Lisa tilted her head to one side, listening intently. "Yes," she said after a moment. "You sound like wind blowing across empty places. But it's getting quieter since you came here. Before, at the space station, the sound was much louder and sadder." The accuracy of her perception was startling. Vorthak's curse had indeed manifested as a kind of spiritual emptiness, a hollow ache that resonated through his consciousness like wind through abandoned ruins. And Lisa was right that the sensation had been diminishing since his arrival at New Guadalajara. "You have a remarkable gift," he told her seriously. "Mom says everyone has gifts," Lisa replied. "Some people are good at fixing things, like Mom is. Some people are good at taking care of sick people, like Dr. Patel. And some people are good at making friends with lonely dragons." The simple categorization made Vorthak smile again. In Lisa's worldview, befriending mythical creatures was apparently just another useful skill, no different from engineering or medicine. Over the following days, Vorthak found himself settling into a routine that would have seemed impossible just weeks earlier. Mornings were spent working with Carmen and the engineering team, applying his knowledge of exotic energy systems to improve the colony's power distribution networks and atmosphere processing capabilities. His suggestions led to efficiency improvements that freed up significant resources for expansion projects. Afternoons were dedicated to medical consultations with Dr. Patel, who had indeed confirmed that his condition was responding positively to sustained social interaction. The burning thirst that had plagued him for centuries was gradually subsiding, replaced by a sense of contentment that grew stronger with each passing day. Evenings were reserved for Lisa, who had appointed herself as his guide to human culture and colonial life. She introduced him to her school friends, who proved to be just as accepting and curious as she had predicted, and shared her collection of adventure stories from Earth's literature. Vorthak found himself particularly enjoying the tales of explorers and pioneers who had left everything behind to build new lives in unknown territories. But it was the quiet moments that affected him most deeply. Times when Lisa would sit beside him in his quarters, working on her homework while he read technical manuals or star charts. Times when Carmen would stop by after a long day of work to discuss engineering problems and share stories about her own journey from Earth to the frontier. Times when other colonists would visit simply to chat about their daily lives and ask his advice on matters both trivial and significant. These humans, Vorthak realized, possessed an extraordinary gift for creating community. They had taken a barren moon in an unremarkable star system and transformed it into a place where beings could feel genuinely at home. More remarkably, they had extended that sense of belonging to include a creature that most of the galaxy considered a living nightmare. Dr. Patel's treatment protocol proved more effective than anyone had dared to hope. By the end of his first week in the colony, Vorthak's chronic thirst had diminished to the point where he could go entire days without thinking about it. By the end of his second week, he realized that he hadn't experienced the familiar burning sensation in over 48 hours. "The electromagnetic patterns in your nervous system have stabilized considerably," Dr. Patel reported during one of their consultations. "Whatever was causing the resonance disruption appears to be resolving itself." "It's the friendships," Lisa said from her position in the corner of the medical bay, where she was building a new starship model while listening to the adults discuss Vorthak's progress. "He's not lonely anymore, so the sad singing is going away." Dr. Patel nodded thoughtfully. "That's probably the most accurate diagnosis I could give." "Vorthak, How do you feel about making your residence here permanent? From a medical standpoint, I believe continued integration into the community will provide the best possible long-term prognosis for your condition. Vorthak looked around the medical bay, taking in the efficient equipment, the caring professionalism of the medical staff, and the casual presence of a 7-year-old who had somehow become central to his recovery. Through the transparent walls, he could see other areas of the colony where beings went about their daily lives with the quiet satisfaction that came from being part of something larger than themselves. I would be honored to become a permanent resident of New Guadalajara, he said formally, if the community will have me. Are you kidding? Lisa exclaimed, jumping up from her model kit with enthusiasm. Everyone loves having you here. Mrs. Patterson says you're the best guest speaker the school has ever had, and the engineering team says you've solved more problems in 2 weeks than they usually handle in 6 months, and Governor Chun told Mom that colony productivity is up 20% since you started helping with the infrastructure projects. Carmen had arrived during Lisa's enthusiastic recitation, and she was smiling broadly at her daughter's excitement. What Lisa is trying to say is that you've become quite popular around here. The housing office has already approved your long-term residency application, and the Colonial Council voted unanimously to offer you a formal position as Chief Technical Advisor. The speed with which the bureaucratic processes have been completed was another indication of how thoroughly he had been accepted by the community. Vorthak had expected months of paperwork and background checks, but New Guadalajara apparently operated on the principle that action spoke louder than documentation. There is one more thing, Carmen added with a slightly mischievous expression. Lisa has been lobbying the governor to declare next week Dragon Appreciation Week in honor of your decision to stay. She's organized quite an extensive celebration. Lisa beamed with pride. We're going to have a parade and a big dinner with everyone's favorite foods, and a storytelling contest where people share tales about brave dragons, and a fireworks display that Mr. Kim says will be visible from orbit. The idea of an entire week of festivities dedicated to celebrating his presence in the colony was overwhelming. Vorthak had spent centuries hiding from other beings, convinced that his appearance would bring only fear and destruction. Now he was being honored as a valued member of a community that had embraced him completely. You have done all of this for me, he asked, genuinely moved. We've done all of this for us, Carmen corrected gently. You're part of our family now, Vorthak. And families celebrate the good things that happen to them. As Vorthak absorbed the full implications of what was being offered to him, not just a place to live, but a genuine home with beings who cared about his well-being, he felt the last traces of his ancient curse finally disappear. The burning thirst that had driven him across the galaxy was completely gone, replaced by a deep sense of satisfaction that seemed to fill every corner of his consciousness. Dr. Patel was monitoring his vital signs during this revelation, and her expression showed amazement at the readings on her instruments. Remarkable, she murmured. Complete neural resonance stabilization. I've never seen such a dramatic recovery from chronic electromagnetic disruption. It's not really surprising, Lisa said with a matter-of-fact wisdom that had characterized her understanding from the beginning. All he needed was for someone to care about him. That's the best medicine there is. Looking down at the small human child who had somehow saved him from an eternity of wandering, Vorthak realized that she was absolutely right. His curse had been broken not by mystical water or advanced medical technology, but by the simple human capacity for compassion toward those who suffered. And now, for the first time in over 3 centuries, he was home. Dragon Appreciation Week became the largest celebration in New Guadalajara's short history, drawing visitors from 3 neighboring star systems and establishing traditions that would endure for generations. But for Vorthak, the week's significance lay not in the public festivities, but in the countless private moments that revealed the true depth of his integration into the colony's daily life. The celebration began with what Governor Chun had officially designated as Technical Innovation Day, though Lisa insisted on calling it Show Off What Vorthak Taught Us Day. Throughout the colony, engineering teams demonstrated the improvements that had been implemented using draconic knowledge of exotic energy systems. Fusion reactors operated at 97% efficiency, up from their previous maximum of 81%. Atmospheric processors have been reconfigured to extract useful materials from waste gases, creating new revenue streams for the colony. Most impressively, the gravitational generators that provided Earth-normal conditions throughout the settlement now functioned with such precision that the artificial gravity felt more natural than many colonists had experienced on their home planets. The most remarkable aspect of these improvements, explained Chief Engineer Rodriguez during a presentation to the gathered dignitaries, is that they were achieved using existing equipment. Vorthack didn't provide us with new technology. He showed us how to use our existing technology more effectively. Vorthack watched the presentation from a position at the back of the colony's main assembly hall, where a specially constructed platform allowed him to observe without blocking the view of other attendees. The humans had insisted that he should be seated in a place of honor at the front of the hall, but he preferred to remain where he could see the entire gathering without making his presence intimidating. Lisa, however, had no such concerns about drawing attention. She had appointed herself as his official escort for all public events, and she took her responsibilities seriously. When Governor Chun invited Vorthack to address the assembly, Lisa marched confidently to the speaking platform and adjusted the microphone system to accommodate his larger vocal cords. "Everyone wants to hear about your travels," she announced to the crowd with the authority of someone who had obviously been planning this moment for days. Especially the parts about brave dragons helping people in danger. The audience, which included not only new Guadalajara residents, but also reporters from the Outer Colonies News Network and trade representatives from the Merchant Marine Guild, listened with rapt attention as Vorthack recounted selected stories from his 3 centuries of wandering. He spoke of civilizations he had encountered, natural phenomena he had witnessed, and technological marvels he had seen developed and abandoned across the galaxy. But as he continued speaking, Vorthack found himself focusing less on his past adventures and more on his recent experiences in New Guadalajara. He described the sensation of being welcomed into a community for the first time in living memory. He spoke about the satisfaction of using his knowledge to help others rather than simply surviving another day of endless searching. Most importantly, he talked about the discovery that the greatest treasure in the galaxy was not some mystical artifact or advanced technology, but the simple human capacity for treating strangers with kindness. "Before I arrived here," he concluded, "I believed that my species was destined for isolation. We are large, powerful, and often frightening to others. I thought this meant we could never be part of a community. The humans of New Guadalajara have taught me that community is not about being the same as everyone else. It is about contributing what you can and accepting what others offer in return." The applause that followed his speech was enthusiastic, but what moved Vorthack most was the sight of Lisa beaming at him with obvious pride. During the reception that followed, she stayed close by his side, introducing him to visitors and explaining to anyone who would listen how dragons weren't really scary once he got to know them properly. "The key is to offer them water," she informed a journalist from the Tau Ceti Gazette with the seriousness of an expert providing professional advice. "But it has to be because you really want to help, not because you think you're supposed to. Dragons can tell the difference." The reporter, a veteran correspondent who had covered interspecies conflicts throughout the Outer Rim, found herself scribbling notes about dragon psychology from a 7-year-old human child. Later, her article about New Guadalajara's successful integration of their draconic resident would be syndicated across 15 star systems and establish Lisa as the galaxy's leading expert on dragon-human relations. The second day of celebration focused on cultural exchange, with humans sharing their artistic traditions while Vorthack demonstrated draconic crafts that had been practiced for millennia. In the colony's main workshop, he showed fascinated observers how to manipulate metal using precise applications of controlled heat and electromagnetic fields. Under his guidance, colonial metalworkers produced alloys with properties that exceeded anything they had achieved using conventional techniques. "The secret," Vorthack explained as he shaped a piece of titanium carbon composite with his claws is understanding that every metal has its own preferred flow patterns. You must work with these patterns rather than against them. Carmen watched the demonstration with the keen interest of an engineer encountering principles that could revolutionize her field. Could this technique be adapted for automated manufacturing processes? She asked. Certainly, Vorthack replied, pausing in his work to consider the question. Though it would require sensors capable of detecting extremely subtle electromagnetic variations in the material. Your current manufacturing systems lack that level of precision. But we could build sensors with that capability, Carmen mused, her mind already working through the engineering challenges involved. Especially if we understood exactly what electromagnetic signatures to look for. Lisa had been listening to this technical discussion while working on her own project, a small decorative sculpture made from scraps of various metals that Vorthack was helping her shape. You should make the sensors together, she suggested with the practical wisdom that had become her trademark. Mom's good at building things, and Vorthack's good at knowing how things work. That's why they make such a good team. The observation was more accurate than the 7-year-old realized. Over the past month, Carmen and Vorthack had developed an extraordinarily effective working partnership. Her intuitive understanding of practical engineering complemented his theoretical knowledge of exotic physics, creating solutions that neither could have achieved alone. Their collaboration had already resulted in 17 registered patents and a standing invitation to present their research at the next Galactic Engineering Symposium. But beyond their professional relationship, a genuine friendship had emerged. Carmen had become one of the few beings who could recognize when Vorthack was experiencing moments of doubt or melancholy, and she had developed an uncanny ability to provide exactly the kind of encouragement he needed. In return, Vorthack served as both technical advisor and trusted confidant, offering perspective drawn from centuries of experience and a patient willingness to listen to problems both professional and personal. You know, Carmen said as she watched her daughter proudly display her metal sculpture to other workshop participants, I never imagined when we left Titan that we'd end up living next door to a dragon who helps Lisa with her science projects. Vorthack chuckled, a sound like distant thunder that had lost all traces of menace. I never imagined that I would find myself explaining metallurgy to human children and attending community planning meetings. Do you miss it? Carmen asked. The traveling, I mean. The freedom to go anywhere in the galaxy. It was a question Vorthack had been asking himself with increasing frequency. His starfaring capabilities remained unchanged. He could leave New Guadalajara at any time and resume his wandering across the cosmos. The difference was that now he had a choice about whether to stay or go, and that choice felt more valuable than all the freedom he had possessed during his centuries of aimless searching. I miss some aspects of exploration, he said honestly. There's a satisfaction in seeing new worlds and discovering phenomena that no one has encountered before. But I have learned that exploration without purpose becomes mere wandering. Here, I have purpose. And what purpose is that? Carmen asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. Vorthack looked around the workshop, taking in the sight of humans and visiting aliens working together to create objects of beauty and utility. Lisa was now helping a Zephyrian trader understand the electromagnetic principles behind draconic metalworking, while other colonists shared techniques they had learned from various species throughout the galaxy. It was a scene that perfectly encapsulated what New Guadalajara represented, a place where different beings could come together to learn from each other and create something greater than any of them could achieve alone. My purpose, he said quietly, is to help build something that will outlast all of us. A community where beings can find what they need to heal, to grow, and to contribute their gifts to others. Carmen nodded with satisfaction. I think that's exactly what Lisa would call the best purpose ever. The third day of Dragon Appreciation Week was dedicated to education, with Vorthack serving as guest lecturer for audiences ranging from elementary school children to graduate students from the University of New Sydney. His presentations covered topics from stellar cartography to xenobiology, but the most popular sessions were those where he simply answered questions about what it was like to be a dragon. Do you breathe fire? Asked Tommy Chun, the governor's 8-year-old nephew, during a session with the colony's youngest students. I can generate plasma discharges when necessary, Vorthak replied seriously. But it requires significant energy, and the applications are quite limited. I prefer to use other methods for solving problems. Like what? Asked Sarah Kim, Lisa's best friend and a frequent visitor to Vorthak's quarters. Careful thinking, usually, Vorthak said with amusement. Most problems can be solved more effectively with intelligence than with firepower. Lisa raised her hand from her position in the front row. Tell them about how you helped Mom fix the reactor cascades. That's an excellent example, Vorthak agreed. The reactor systems were failing because multiple automated processes were trying to operate simultaneously without proper coordination. Instead of using brute force to override the conflicted systems, we analyzed the communication protocols and identified ways to help the different processes work together more effectively. Tommy Chun frowned with concentration. So, instead of breaking the bad things, you made them into good things. Precisely, Vorthak said, impressed by the child's understanding. Violence is rarely the best solution to complex problems. Usually, it's more effective to understand why something isn't working properly and then address the underlying cause. Mrs. Patterson, the school's principal, had been observing the session with obvious delight. After the children had been dismissed for recess, she approached Vorthak with a proposition. I've been authorized by the Colonial Education Board to offer you a permanent position as visiting professor of applied xenotechnology, she said. The salary isn't enormous, but it would give you official status as an educator and access to our research facilities. The offer was tempting for reasons that had little to do with compensation. Vorthak had discovered that he genuinely enjoyed teaching, particularly when working with students whose mind were still flexible enough to grasp concepts that seemed impossible to more conventional thinkers. I would be honored to accept such a position, he said, though I should point out that my knowledge of human educational theory is quite limited. That's why it would be a collaborative arrangement, Mrs. Patterson explained. You'd work with our regular faculty to develop curriculum that combines your expertise with our understanding of how different species learn most effectively. Lisa has already volunteered to serve as your student advisor. The idea of working formally with Lisa in an educational context was particularly appealing. The child had an intuitive grasp of complex concepts that amazed even her most gifted teachers, and her ability to explain difficult ideas in simple terms had already proved invaluable during his informal presentations. In that case, I accept with enthusiasm, Vorthak said. When would you like me to begin? Next week, if possible, Mrs. Patterson replied with a smile. We've had requests from 17 other colonial settlements asking if we could develop distance learning programs featuring your courses. Apparently, word about your teaching abilities has spread quite rapidly through academic circles. That evening, Vorthak found himself in his quarters with Lisa, Carmen, and Dr. Patel, discussing the unexpected direction his life had taken. The formal celebrations of Dragon Appreciation Week would continue for several more days, but these quiet conversations with his closest friends had become the most meaningful part of each day. A professor, Lisa mused, clearly delighted with this development. That's perfect. You already know everything, and you're really good at explaining stuff so people can understand it. I don't know everything, Vorthak protested mildly. In fact, working with humans has taught me that there's far more to learn than I ever realized. Like what? Dr. Patel asked with professional curiosity. Vorthak considered the question carefully. I spent centuries focusing on physical phenomena, stellar mechanics, exotic energy systems, space-time manipulation. But humans have shown me that the most important sciences are those that deal with relationships between conscious beings. Psychology, sociology, education, medicine practiced with genuine compassion rather than mere technical competence. These are areas where my species has much to learn. Carmen had been reviewing technical specifications for a new atmosphere processing plan on her tablet, but now she looked up with interest. That raises an intriguing possibility. If you're going to be working in education, you might want to consider developing courses that other dragons could attend. You can't be the only member of your species who would benefit from learning about community building and interspecies cooperation. The suggestion struck Vorthak with unexpected force. He had spent so long thinking of himself as an isolated individual that the possibility of sharing his experiences with other dragons had never occurred to him. But Carmen was right, there were.